Morning, and thanks to Guy Stauber for joining me on our Meet the Artist today. Guy, you've got so much talent to offer as an artist, so it would be really good for our community to learn a little bit more about you and your abilities. So welcome.
Thank
How
you.
long have you been an artist for, and are you from a family of creative people?
I suppose professionally, getting on for 20 years now, but I always used to draw and sketch as a kid, and I was always fascinated by graphics and advertising, and comics particularly were big for me when I was a boy. So I guess it all started back there, movies, the 80s, all that kind of stuff. But I suppose, professionally and seriously for around about 20 odd years.
Wow.
In terms of a creative family, not really. Both my parents are from scientific backgrounds.
Okay.
May explain my analytical approach to the work that I do, but unless there was some painter way back in the mists of time, I would say, broadly speaking, not from a creative family.
Okay. So you're a bit of an anomaly like that.
I'm the black
The
sheep.
anomaly.
Yeah,
Can you remember how long you've been with KJA? I bet you can't.
that's a good question. Um, have you got the answer to that and you're testing me?
Yeah, it's not a trick question. Yeah, I did look it up actually.
It's got to be 10 years, hasn't it?
Oh, it's longer. Yeah, it was 2010.
Was it really?
Yeah, unbelievably. Um,
Wow.
yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
and so, um, what would you say is the style you specialize in, and what do you use primarily as a software?
Style's an interesting one because you never quite want to pigeonhole yourself. But I think what I do maybe exists somewhere between pop art, between comic book illustration, and maybe a dash of kind of sort of fantasy film poster type thing. It operates somewhere in that Venn diagram.
Yep.
I use Photoshop and Illustrator, mostly Illustrator, but with a bit of Photoshop thrown in, depending on what the job is, depending on what the requirements are. And those are kind of the tools of my trade. I use other little bits and bobs, little plugins and little things here and there, but those are the two workhorses for me.
Right. Just so the plugins are just as and when you need to get an effect
Yeah,
you can get from Illustrator or Photoshop.
exactly.
Okay. And would you say your style's changed over the years?
I think it probably has. It used to be super tight, super clean, super clinical. And I think over the years, there's a bit more freedom in it, perhaps. There's certainly more texture, there's a bit more depth. It's not a bad thing to be able to revert to the old style every now and again, depending on the job.
Yeah,
So I suppose I've got a spectrum of things that I do that all look like me, but I can turn it up and down
sure.
depending on what's required on any given day.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, I just think having known you so long, it seems like your work's become much more rich and vibrant, I think, over time.
I think so. I think that's to do with texture. I think that's to do with perhaps depth as well.
Yeah.
Um, it used to be quite straightforward in terms of composition, and I think these days I do more kind of landscapey type stuff with more elements, with more assets. Just trying to explore and push it really. But I think it's important that it always looks like me, but it can have different aspects to it as time goes on.
Sure. And who would you say, and what would you say is your biggest influences?
Loads of stuff really. I think we take things on and absorb things often without knowing it. I was a child of the 80s, so popular culture's big for me. 80s movies. I remember a time when the film posters for the big films were painted and airbrushed by
Yeah,
artists, and that was a big influence on me. That was, I think, maybe the first time I started to get interested in creative things and wonder how on earth that kind of thing was done. It seemed like sorcery and magic to me at the time,
it
and
was,
I
wasn't
miss
it?
them now. They're all just photoshopped collages of heads now, and then they're not very inspiring. But back then it was quite a magical thing.
Yeah,
So I
no,
suppose that kind of illustration and that period of time has affected me as a young boy, and I never got over it.
okay. And I suppose it's similar but slightly different question. It's like, so where's your inspiration found?
Oh, it's found all over the place. Often it's found in other artists. Often it's found in comic books, and graphic novels are still quite big for me. Artists like Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz, and I mean the list is really endless there.
Yeah,
There are other artists who I look at who are producing things like contemporary movie posters. People like Matt Taylor, Martin Ansin, and the sort of the old masters like Bob Peake and Drew Struzan, um, Roger Castell. The list goes on forever,
yeah,
really. But I always am influenced by people like that, by people who kind of push the envelope and are able to create these incredible compositions, but still be in control of them. I think that's a real skill.
yeah. No, absolutely. And do you have a favorite time of day to work? I mean, a lot of artists tend to be night owls. I've found over the years. Are you a night
Yeah,
owl?
kind of depends what mood I'm in. I do like to get stuff moving in the morning. I like to get in early. I like to get some momentum going. Whether or not I'm able to use that kind of warm up stuff that I do is incidental. I like to get the thing moving,
Yeah,
and hopefully by lunchtime or by afternoon, I've got some momentum and things start clicking and falling into place. It's almost like warming up before a run or something.
yeah,
I feel like I've got to get it all moving in the morning. And sometimes what I do in the morning is good, sometimes it's not. But it's important to get me kind of off the mark.
yeah.
And then
I
if I have to work late into the night, then that's cool. But it's usually off the back of what I've achieved early on.
Yeah, no, I was the same. That making those first marks in the morning was always daunting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the blank page syndrome, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. So, tell everybody about maybe your top three pieces of work you think you've created, and for what sort of clients would you say they were for?
I think what springs to mind off the back of that question is a trilogy. It's a trilogy of posters that I created probably 2 years ago now, in
Okay.
conjunction with a licensing company in California called Acme Archives, who do all the licensing for Lucasfilm.
Oh yes, yeah,
And I was working with them, and I did a trilogy of the original Star Wars movies, but I tried to do something quite different. Obviously, there's a ton of artwork on that subject out there, and
yeah,
if you're going to stand out, you've got to try and do something different. So I did three landscapes with no people in, with no real characters in, and they were really more about the environments than they were about the films. You sort of have to look quite closely to see that they were really a narrative about those particular movies. So one was about sand, one was about snow, and one was about forest. And
right,
I thought they were quite interesting. I thought they were quite different. The client really liked them. They've sold reasonably well. I believe they've actually sold out now. So I
that was
took
good.
that approach. I just thought, what would happen if we just did three landscapes with incidental references to the movies.
Yeah, but for the
And that
people that
was
in the know, they knew what they were.
exactly right, yeah. And they had a little logo and a little sign off on them, so it wasn't too cryptic, but it was, I felt, a reaction to other kinds of stuff that were out there that were very, very character heavy. And also, there's an awful lot of red tape when you include actor likeness in a licensed
Yeah,
product.
of
So I thought I'd try to invent some of that by taking that approach as well. And they kind of fit together quite nicely. They were not designed as one piece, but they were designed to rhyme with each other.
sure.
Um, so I was quite pleased with that because it was something different for me and it was something different for the genre.
No, absolutely. And how do you continue to develop your skills and keep current, especially with the move, the move in the business? It's so fast these days.
Yes, indeed. Not to. I try not to sort of worry about keeping up with the Joneses sort of idea for the sake of it, but I do try and push myself in terms of how do I create a new texture? How do I create a new brush? How do I create a new asset that I can use in my work going forward? So I might look at what other people have done that is kind of external or outside of what I do. And I wonder how they achieve that, and then I'll try and come up with techniques to do my version of it. And in doing that, I think you can push your own practice forward.
Yeah, no,
It doesn't
absolutely.
always work. In fact, often the failure teaches you more than the success,
Yeah,
which is important. But I try and develop new techniques and integrate them into my workflow and see what happens.
brilliant. Okay. And what's your interest in NFTs? Um,
Well, to be honest, that came from you. when you presented the idea to me and explained what the NFT structure was, it really felt like a system that was set up to benefit the artist. And with the way in which my industry and our industry has changed over the last few years, it was a very welcome opportunity to gain a little bit of independence.
Yeah.
The way you go straight to the end user with the work. There are no real gatekeepers in the way, both in terms of how the work gets produced and marketed, and also in the way that you get paid if you're lucky enough to sell any. There are no gatekeepers in the way. It comes straight back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no waiting. There's no 28-day turnaround. There's none of that nonsense. There's no accounts department saying to you, we can't pay you this month. It seems quite straightforward. It seems quite instant in terms of the infrastructure. And it's also an opportunity to have several pieces of work, maybe hundreds of pieces of work out there in the space working for you whilst you're carrying on with your practice. And that was a really attractive idea to me, because normally my process is someone comes to me, they commission me, I do it, they pay me, we go our separate ways, and that job is kind of dead from that point on. Whereas the NFT system, they're out there, they're doing stuff sort of on their own. People are hopefully flipping them, and you get a little kickback every time that happens. And it's like the work's never quite dead, it's never quite finished, it's always out there working away on your behalf. And I think that's a great system. It's something that artists traditionally haven't had.
No, and that financial freedom,
it's quite exciting.
Yeah, that financial freedom, I think, was our driving force behind setting up White Light, and also just creative autonomy for yourselves. You get to decide what you create, and you only get out of it what you put into it.
Yeah, exactly.
And what was the driving force behind your eagerly awaited digital punk collection?
Well, I hope they are eagerly awaited. Well, I think when you and I started discussing this project last year, I didn't really know what to do, and there wasn't really a brief. There was just do something you feel would be appropriate. So I had a look around at what other people were doing, not with an idea to copy them, but just to see what was popular in that space. And it seemed to me that things related to science fiction, related to cyberpunk, related to that kind of genre, seemed to fit and rhyme reasonably well with that world. And that was a great excuse for me to do something sci-fi, to do something kind of, I mean, there are bionic elements to it, there are punky elements to it, there are sort of a neon, almost like Tokyo aesthetic to it, which are all things that I have an interest in, and all things which seem to sit in that world, seem to be appropriate for that world. It is a very diverse space. There are all different kinds of work represented there, which I think is a good thing. But I thought, let's go with something that seems to fit, that seems appropriate, and that's how I came up. That's how I came up with that idea. And I suppose time will tell whether we're right or not.
No, they're definitely. I mean, everybody we've shown them to. There's a huge amount of interest, and rightly so. Bringing all your creative force and experience over the years to the fore, making them available. So yeah, it is eagerly awaited, and it will sell out, and for sure. Which brings me to
there we go. I'm eagerly awaiting that.
Yeah, I mean the other thing is, obviously I know the answer to this, but what's your plan for the next collection after you've sold out on digital punks?
Well, as you know, we've actually got a few things lined up, and we haven't actually picked one yet. There are three options. One is kind of like a Cyberwoman type character with kind of big science fiction wraparound glasses on, in a kind of a Tron aesthetic. That's a possibility. There is like there's one called Dragon Warrior, which is like a female warrior with various different types of kind of cyberpunk style weapons, which is quite a good way of accessorizing the character, because as we know, and as I've learned over the course of this journey, the idea of producing different versions of the same thing to keep it fresh and interesting and to get a decent collection together is important. So I've begun to understand the importance of accessorizing with these various other characters. And what's the other one? There is another one. I can't remember what it is.
Well, maybe we'll keep that one under wraps.
We'll keep that one as a secret, as a
Yeah, I
special.
mean, I know what it is, but
Special deal.
I think we'll keep everybody waiting and guessing. But
Yeah, that sounds good.
Guy, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and especially about art and NFTs. So thanks for joining me this morning, and yeah, let's see how the launch goes, and move onwards and upwards.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me, Kevin, and thanks for introducing me to this mad world of NFTs, because it was a completely kind of unknown space to me, and I'm excited to be part of it now.
Yeah, well, we're very lucky to have you as our guinea pig for our first launch, and you've been
Well, we'll see. Yeah,
hugely receptive and hugely involved, and yeah, you're you know a credit to yourself and to your profession. So thanks again, and I will speak to you soon.
yes, thanks, Kevin. All the
All right,
best.
take care. Bye now.